One day, a couple of years ago when I was 25 years old, I had a little time to kill before picking up my kids from school. It was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising some back roads in my small rural hometown listening to music. I passed this guy with his thumb out trying to catch a ride. He looked to be in either his late 30s or early 40s, and he was carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Being a female by myself, I decided to just keep driving. I passed the man and kept going, but as I drove, I had this internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick up the guy. I figured if I was in his shoes, I would want to be picked up. That, mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing things out of my comfort zone, led me to the conclusion that if he was still there when I came back around, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling over to pick him up, but I had a safety plan formed in case anything went wrong. As soon as he got in, I realized I had probably made a horrible mistake. Firstly, because he seemed like he was on some sort of a drug and smelled awful, and secondly, because this dude was looking at me in ways that make women uncomfortable. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke, and my hands were shaking so bad when I was grabbing one from my pack. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves, but I was internally freaking out and had gone through many of the what-if scenarios in my head already. The guy's name was Wayne, and he lived about 5 minutes from where I picked him up, so thankfully the drive didn't last that long. Meanwhile, he was telling me about how he lost his license due to DUIs, and how he was living in this house with an old man. He was also trying to talk me into hanging out at his house with him and coming over to drink with him the next day. When I finally got him to his destination, it was a little shack thing that was surrounded by all these junk cars and other trash. He got out and still tried to get me to come inside with him. I told him no, and I left. I was feeling really relieved once I was gone, and a little proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to a month later when I found out that somebody got murdered down that same road where I dropped Wayne off at. I saw Wayne's picture on Facebook saying that he was arrested for stabbing someone to death at the very house I dropped him off at. Graphic information about how he stabbed him in the lungs and the victim bled out in that little shack. Also, it turns out that the old man Wayne was saying he lived with didn't exist, and he was the only person living there. Very creepy stuff, and I'm sure I'll never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. Years ago, right after I graduated from high school, I did a lot of couch surfing and was staying with my friend Mike for a while. His family lived about 30 miles north of the town I worked in, and his mother usually brought me down to town with her in the morning when she went to work. Mike and I would often stay late in town to hang out with friends, so we'd have to bum rides or hitchhike back if we wanted to sleep at the house. So one Friday, he and I stuck around town for too long and missed our ride back with his mom. We were young and brave tough guys, so we didn't think too much of hitchhiking back. We hung around the interstate exit with our thumbs out and scored a ride with two really cool Jamaican dudes. They drove us most of the way back up the highway and dropped us off at a town about 5 miles from where we were headed. Everything was going well, and we were happy we had made such great time getting this far. We walked up through the town, stopped for drinks, and headed out the north end to start hitchhiking again. We got picked up pretty quickly by a guy in his 40s who was very friendly. He told us he was headed right past the road we were headed for, and we couldn't believe our luck. I jumped in the front and Mike got in the back seat. As we came up on the turn near our drop-off point, the man suddenly put his hand on my leg. I quickly pushed his hand off my leg and basically stared him down. It was starting to get dark, but I told the man to let us off here on the road and we would walk the rest of the way. I just didn't want to be in the car with this guy anymore. The guy instead proceeded to reply, "Just relax, it's all cool, I'll drive you to where you're headed." And then he put his hand back on my leg. I was really angry at this guy, and I told him to pull over immediately as I reached for my pocket knife. Mike, from the back seat, grabbed the guy and put him in a headlock and started choking him out, telling him to pull over. The man let go of my leg and started yanking on Mike's arm, trying to get free. Both hands were off the wheel and the car was swerving all over the road. We were still going at least 40 miles per hour, and I was terrified we were going to crash. We were headed straight for this big tree on the side of the road, and the driver must have seen it because he slammed on the brakes at the last second. The car was moving slow enough to jump out, so I yelled "jump" to Mike, and then shoved the door open and we dove out onto the pavement. The driver realized I was getting away, and he hit the gas, making the door spring back and almost catch my feet. The back wheel missed me by less than a foot and the guy sped away, already back up to 40 miles an hour. Mike was rolling in the middle of the road and I realized we had both made it out of the car. I grabbed Mike and we dragged ourselves off the road into the trees. The car was now doing a U-turn in the middle of the road about 100 yards away to come back towards us. We quickly flattened ourselves in mud and dirt as we hit as low as we could make ourselves. Both of us were banged up and bleeding from the pavement. The psycho drove past real slow to try to spot us, and he even turned around and came back again. Every time he got out of sight, we would jump up and run through the woods headed towards Mike's parents' house, which was still several miles away. Every time we heard a car coming, we would drop and hide. The car must have gone up and down the road a dozen times or more looking for us. It took nearly 2 more hours to make it the next couple of miles in the woods in the dark. We finally got to the house, dirty, bloody, exhausted, and Mike's parents went nuts when they saw us. Mike's dad is a scary guy. He's huge, about 6'6", very strong, and has a bit of a temper as well. So naturally, instead of calling the police, he marched us down the highway and made us stand in the road as bait for the driver to come back while he hid in the woods. We stood there for another hour or so, but the guy didn't come back, which I have mixed feelings about. Mike's dad probably would have beaten the guy to death if he'd caught him, which is that guy's problem, but I was afraid the guy had a gun or something. After all, how was he planning on kidnapping 2 guys at the same time? Mike's mom made us report it to the police the next morning, but I never heard if they caught the guy. This experience is exactly why I don't hitchhike anymore, or pick up hitchhikers. When I was a teenager growing up in Southern California, it was not uncommon to hitchhike with friends. This was way before Uber or Lyft, and my friends and I actually always came out with cool stories from our experiences, as nothing bad had happened to me yet. We had some basic rules for hitchhiking being young girls, and the main ones was to never get into a van and to never get into a vehicle with more than 2 guys in it. I ended up in a horrible situation because I broke those rules. Southern California at the time had a ton of clubs you could get into while being under 18 years old, and bartenders could tell who was of drinking age by a band on your arm. It was not hard back then for my friends and I to slip off the under 18 bands and slip a drinking age one on. This was the 90s, so it wasn't really that strict. We were at one of these clubs, and my friends had decided that it was time to leave, but I had told my grandparents who I was staying with that I was spending the night at a friend's house. I wasn't ready to go, and I let my friends leave without me. When I finally decided to leave, I admit I had a little too much to drink, and I probably was visibly intoxicated. We had pagers back in those days, so I had paged my friend who I was staying with that night that I was headed over to her place now. I started to walk the 3 or 4 miles to the apartment complex when a vehicle pulled up, asking if I needed a ride. The guy was kinda cute, and I was very drunk, so I ignored the safety rules. It was a van full of college-aged guys, and it went against everything I knew, but I did it anyway. As soon as the van door closed, I knew I had made a huge mistake. The cute guy summoned me to sit on his lap in the passenger seat, to which I obliged. Then he started feeling me and the entire vibe changed. I knew I was in trouble. I played along and started talking about an after party with all my hot friends, some that were models, in hopes of putting their focus on something else. The driver summoned me to sit on his lap, to which I obliged again, knowing the longer I played along with them, the better. He would take his hands off the wheel, and then I would grab the steering wheel and he would grab me inappropriately. I felt that these 4 guys in the van were looking for an area to take me, and I knew what would happen if they found one. I then went into an elaborate story of how these after parties usually went. I told the guys of how drugs and alcohol were abundant, and how they were expecting me to bring cute guys to the party. I played these guys to the best of my ability because I knew that my well-being counted on it. Thankfully it worked, and they drove me to my friend's apartment complex since I told them that's where the party was. The apartment complex had a few other complexes around it with a park in the center. I had these guys pull up and park across the park, which was approximately 100 yards away from where I was actually going. I played out how much fun we were all going to have. As soon as the van door opened, I booked it and ran as fast as I could across the park, and could hear the guys yelling and coming after me. I was too afraid to look back, and I just kept running. I ran to the complex next to where I was actually going, where my friends had lived. I found a stairwell that had a few bikes chained to it, and I slid under the staircase. I could hear the guys yelling for me and getting close. I was afraid that my breathing was loud, and I was convinced that they might even hear my heart beating. It was so loud in my ears. I tucked up into the fetal position and closed my eyes so tight I thought I couldn't see them. I guess I thought if I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me. I tried my hardest to control my breathing and my heartbeat. I stayed under that staircase for a while and they never found me, but not because of a lack of trying to find me. I was too scared to move. I felt like they were waiting and watching, so I stayed frozen. I finally had the courage to move after a while, and I carefully made my way to my friend's place where I was staying. I made it and I was safe. I never hitched a ride from a stranger again. I know how lucky I was, and I know very well what could have happened, and I will be forever grateful that I did not become a statistic that night. I learned a very valuable lesson that night.